So now let's go ahead and turn to Genesis. We're picking up our story. We're continuing our story of a family out of nothing. We've been in Genesis for a while now, and we are we're heading towards a close. I'll tell you, I'm doing 3 chapters this week and 2 chapters tomorrow, so I'm trying to make some headway for us so we can hopefully finish up Genesis before August. But we've covered a lot while we've been in Genesis, and really the story picked up in Genesis 12 with Abraham. Just to recap, God comes to Abraham and makes a covenant with him. This is a man who doesn't have much at this point. There's nothing really setting him apart from anybody else. He's not a big deal, but God makes a covenant with him. He promises that he's going to have land. He's going to have descendants. He's going to be a blessing to the whole world, and that God's presence is going to be with him. From there, Abraham has a miracle child of Isaac, and Isaac then has 2 brothers, Jacob and Esau. And Jacob's going to continue to be our main character for the next couple weeks. But, and it's a great day to talk about this on Father's Day. We're going to have a couple of examples of some things that you shouldn't do as a father, some not so great examples of father figures. But growing up, Jacob and Esau, they're twins, and their parents had favorites. Jacob was favored by Rebekah, and Esau was favored by Isaac, and that causes some conflict, some problems as they're growing up. Remember that one day Esau comes in. He is a hunter, and Jacob has made a stew. And Esau didn't have a whole lot of success at hunting, and he is starving. He sees the soup and says, "I will sell you my inheritance for that soup." And they agree. Esau sells his inheritance over to Jacob for a bowl of soup. Then, moving forward a few years, when Isaac thinks that he is heading towards his death, we see that that's not the case. He actually lives many, many, many years longer. But there's a health concern. They bring the boys together, and Jacob is told, "Hey, go in and pretend to be Esau so that you can receive his rightful part of the inheritance." As the older brother, Esau should have received more. He should have received the blessing. He should have received the inheritance. But Jacob is convinced by his mother to go in, pretend to be Esau, and he receives Esau's rightful part of the blessing and the inheritance. And obviously, that's going to make Esau pretty angry. So Jacob is told, "You need to leave." His mother tells him, "You need to leave. You need to flee. You need to go to Haran," which is where Abraham is originally from. "You need to flee to my brother over in Haran." And last week, we saw the beginning of what that journey looks like. Jacob goes, and as he's going, he's leaving everything behind. The inheritance that he stole, the blessing that he stole. He has all of these expectations of what his life is going to look like as he's leaving, going towards Haran, and he's having to leave all of that behind as he heads out into the wilderness. And while he's there in the wilderness, God comes and he has a dream, he has a vision. And God makes a promise to Jacob, just as he made the promise to Abraham, that he's going to have land, that he's going to have descendants, that he's going to be a blessing to the nations, and that God will be with Jacob and his family. That's the context that we're stepping into with our story. As we are picking up, this is where Jacob is. He is heading towards Haran to meet up with his mother's brother, and we're going to see what happens. So today we are going to be in Genesis 29, 30, and 31. That's 3 chapters, so I'm not going to read all 3 of them, but we're going to tell the story, talk about it, and then come back and look at some important points. So Jacob is traveling to Haran, again, where Abraham is from, and he spots a bunch of shepherds as he enters into the area. He goes up to them and says, "Hey, do you know Laban? Do you know this person?" And they say, "Yeah, we know Laban. his daughter is actually coming down now. She's a shepherdess. We're waiting to get water, but if you wait, you'll be able to see her and while she's watering their flock. So again, Laban is Jacob's uncle. It's Rebekah's brother. And let's zoom into 29, verses 9 through 15, and see what he says when they're introduced. So, while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. As soon as Jacob saw his uncle Laban's daughter Rachel with his sheep, he went up and rolled the stone from the opening and watered his uncle Laban's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept loudly. He told Rachel that he was her father's relative, Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. When Laban heard the news about his sister's son Jacob, he ran to meet him, hugged him, and kissed him. They took him to his house, and Jacob told him all that had happened. Laban said, "Yes, you are my own flesh and my own blood." After Jacob had stayed with them a month, Laban said to him, "Just because you're my relative, should you work for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be." So Laban comes out to meet his nephew. And this is a big deal because there's a really good chance that there had been absolutely no news of Rebekah, Jacob's mother, since she left with Abraham almost a century ago. We don't know if there was any form of communication. We don't know if the family had seen each other. This may be Laban's first instance of seeing his nephew, of knowing that they're okay, that the line continued, that Rebekah's okay. And he says, "You are my own flesh and blood." This is important. We're going to come back to this because it has a dual meaning, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. But he's saying, yes, you are my family, and we're excited for this. And this is where the story that we know begins to pick up. So Jacob says, hey, if you're here, you're working, you're going to continue to work, so what should I pay you? And Jacob says, I love your daughter, Rachel. I want to marry her. And he says, okay, great. Let's set up an agreement. Let's set up a contract to make that work. You're going to work for 7 years, and then you can marry my daughter, Rachel. So let's look at chapter 29, verses 21 through 26. Jumping ahead there a little bit. Let's pick up right there in 16. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The older was named Leah, and the younger was named Rachel. Leah had tender eyes, but Rachel was shapely and beautiful. Jacob loved Rachel, so he answered Laban, "I'll work for you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel." Laban replied, "Better that I give her to you than some other man. Stay with me." Jacob worked 7 years for Rachel, and it seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Now, this was very common in ancient Near East. When people got married, there was always a bridal contract that went along with it, and typically a bride price or a dowry. But Jacob obviously didn't have any of that, so they came to a different sort of agreement, that Jacob was going to work for 7 years, and part of the money that was made by Jacob and his efforts during that time would be paid to him as salary. Part of it would be set aside for the bride price for Rachel. This would have all been in the contract. That money that is going towards the bride price was supposed to be set aside for Rachel in case something happened to Jacob, in case if he were to die, then there would be money there to support her. If he were to divorce her, there would be money there to support her. It was supposed to be a safety net for Rachel, not just money going into the father's pocket. So this, again, would have all been laid out in a bridal contract that was set up and signed prior to them actually getting married. So Jacob works the 7 years. We see that. They have their big wedding party. Typically, these would be week-long festivals where the whole community would come. They would have food. They would have drink. It would be this huge party, this huge festival. The night of the wedding, Jacob goes into the tent the next morning, and he wakes up. Oh, it's not Rachel. Looking at verse 21, or 9, 21, then Jacob said to Laban, since my time is complete, give me my wife so I can sleep with her. So Laban invited all the men of the place and sponsored a feast. That evening, Laban took his daughter Leah and gave her to Jacob, and he slept with her. And Laban gave his slave Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a slave. When morning came, there was Leah. So he said to Laban, what have you done to me? Wasn't it for Rachel that I worked for you? Why have you deceived me? Laban said, it's not the custom in our country to give the younger daughter in marriage before the firstborn. So this is where, of course, obviously, Jacob would have been pretty distraught if he thinks he's working for this one woman, wakes up the night after his wedding, it's not her. So what's the situation here? Obviously, if there was a contract set in place, then there would be some legal recourse, right? I mean, this isn't what they agreed upon. But Laban says, that's not how we do it in our culture. You're supposed to marry, or the older is supposed to be married off before the younger. So since she hadn't been, that hadn't happened, we had to marry her off first. So technically, the contract that we made up, that's still in play, and you can start working on that at any point in time. But Leah had to be married first. And it's likely that he's telling the truth because, again, there would have been some sort of legal recourse for Laban if that wasn't the case. If this wasn't the custom, then Jacob likely could have done something and there would have been consequences to it. There's probably a lot more cultural stuff there that we don't understand, but ultimately Jacob was deceived. He was deceived by Laban. He was tricked. And now Laban says, all right, if you want Rachel, you can go ahead and marry her, but you're going to work for another 7 years for me. And Jacob agrees. They go ahead, finish the wedding party for Leah, have the wedding party for Rachel, and now they're just a big, happy family, right? I'm sure there's absolutely no consequences, no family conflict happening there. Obviously, that's a whole lot of sarcasm because we begin to see that immediately, verse 28, it tells us, in 30, Jacob slept with Rachel, and also, indeed, he loved Rachel more than Leah, and he worked for Laban for another 7 years. So already starting off these marriages with favoritism. And I mean, on one hand, can you really blame him? This was the person he wanted to marry. This is the person he had worked to marry. But at the same time, it's very clear he loves Rachel more than he loves Leah. And there's been a problem with favoritism throughout the Abrahamic line. You see that Isaac is favored over Ishmael. You saw that both Jacob and Esau were favored by one parent. Jacob is going to have favored children. It's a problem that's going to carry on, is this favoritism that's happening in the family. But Jacob loves Rachel more than he loves Leah. Now, despite that, that doesn't stop them from having a large family. They begin having kids, and because God sees that Rachel is favored over Leah, he closes Rachel's womb, and Leah begins to have kids, and she begins to have multiple kids. But I want to look at the names that are given to Leah's kids as they are born. So let's look at chapter 30, 31 through 35. Sorry, I'm using Craig's Bible, so everything's not where I expect it to be. That's the wrong scripture passage. Anyway, here we go. Let's go back a little bit. Sorry about that. 29, starting with... Here we go, 31. When the Lord saw that Leah was neglected, he opened her womb, but Rachel was unable to conceive. Leah conceived, gave birth to a son, and named him Reuben, for she said, "The Lord has seen my affliction. Surely my husband will love me now." Going down, she conceived again. "The Lord heard that I am neglected, and has also given me this son." So she named him Simeon. She conceived again. "At last my husband will become attached to me because I have borne 3 sons to him." Therefore he was named Levi. And she conceived again, gave birth to the son. This time I will praise the Lord. Therefore she named him Judah. You can see, it's very obvious to Leah that she is not the favored wife. She is neglected, and she's naming her children in a way that shows that. She's calling out to the Lord, praising the Lord, and hoping that by having these children, it's going to end up resulting in the love of her husband. Eventually, Leah stops having kids. Rachel gets jealous because she's not able to have kids, so she gives Jacob her handmaiden, and they begin to have kids. And then when Leah's not able to have kids, she gives Jacob her handmaiden, and they begin having kids. And then finally, Rachel is able to have a child. So we're not going to look at all of these kids for the sake of time, but what's important to know, at this point there are 12 children, 11 boys, and 1 daughter. Not all of the kids have been born yet, but this is where we are at. There's one story I do want to zoom into that involves the children, and that's going to be in chapter 30, verses 14 through 16. And it's kind of a weird story. But when Jacob came in from the field that evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come with me, for I have hired your son with his mandrakes." So what's happened here is Reuben, the oldest son of Leah, was out in a field and found some sort of fruit or vegetable. There's arguments over it was mandrakes or something else, but whatever this fruit is, this food was connected to fertility. It was supposed to make you more fertile. At this point, Rachel's womb is still closed, so she wants that opportunity. So she says, "I will give you," Rachel talking to Leah, "I will give you a night with Jacob if you give me these fruits to hopefully help with, helping me conceive." So there's a deal made over this food, and Jacob goes, and he has a night with Leah, and she conceives from that. Put that story on hold it in the back of your brain, because we're going to come back to it in a little bit, but I wanted to zone in on it before moving forward. While all of this is happening, obviously Jacob has been here for a while. He has to work 7 years for Leah, then 7 years for Rachel, and continues to stay there working past that 7-year period. While all of this is happening, Jacob is being very prosperous. He's bringing prosperity to both himself and Laban. His family is growing. His flocks are growing. His resources are growing. And you see that. And after Joseph is born, that's the first child born to Rachel, he goes to Laban and says, "Hey, it's time for us to leave." And there's a reason he waited that long. And that was for the safety of Rachel. Typically, a son-in-law wouldn't leave the family's camp, the family's area, until a son was born to the wife, and that was for the safety of the wife. Once a son was born, there was a lot more security there for her that she wasn't going to be divorced, that she wasn't going to be left. So it's likely that up to this point, there would have been no chance that Laban would have let them leave his site with Rachel not having a child, because there would have been a chance that Jacob, once they left, could have divorced her, could have just left her on the side of the road, been on his way, and there would have been nothing that Laban could have done for Rachel's safety. So now that they had met the qualifications, they'd done all the requirements, she had a son, Jacob goes to Laban and says, "Hey, it's time for us to leave." And Laban says, "I don't really want that to happen. I know that God is blessing me through you, so let's figure out something we can do to get you to stay. What can we do? What payment do you need to continue staying for my prosperity and for yours?" So they come to an agreement. We're not going to go into the details because it gets confusing with spotted goats and striped goats and white sheep and black sheep and all that sort of thing. But the main point is they come to an agreement on wages for Jacob to continue working. And almost immediately after that agreement is set, Laban goes and changes it. He takes all of the sheep that were supposed to be Jacob's out of his flock, puts them somewhere else. Again, Laban is deceiving Jacob. That's the point of that story. They had something that was agreed upon. Laban changes the terms, but despite all of it, Jacob is still prosperous. God is still blessing him. After a while, Laban's sons are fed up with Jacob. They see the prosperity that's coming to him, and they say, "This is on our father's back that Jacob is prospering. We just need to get rid of him for the sake of our father." And really for their own sake, for their inheritance, for their prosperity. So they're done with Jacob. Well, Jacob gets word of this. And he goes to Rachel and he goes to Leah and says, "Hey, it's time to leave." Chapter 31. Now Jacob heard what Laban's sons were saying. Jacob had taken all that was our father's and has built his wealth from what belonged to our father. And Jacob saw from Laban's face that his attitude towards him was not the same as before. The Lord said to him, "Go back to the land of your ancestors and to your family, and I will be with you." Jacob had Rachel and Leah called to the field where his flocks were. He said to them, "I can see from your father's face that his attitude towards me is not the same as before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that with all of my strength I have served your father, and that he has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times, but God did not let him harm me." Then let's jump to verse 14. Then Rachel and Leah answered him, "Do we have any portion or inheritance in our family? Are we not regarded by him as outsiders? For he has sold us, and he has certainly spent our purchase price. In fact, all that wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. So do whatever God has said to you." So Jacob has a dream. On top of hearing the conversations from Laban and his sons, Jacob has a dream of God telling him it's time to go back home. And when he approaches Leah and Rachel, they say, "Yeah, it's time." Because just as Laban has been swindling and deceiving Jacob, he's doing the same things to his daughters. That money that was supposed to be set aside, that bride price that Jacob worked for, that was supposed to be aside for their inheritance, for their safety, we find out that Laban has spent it, effectively selling the girls. It's not that he didn't treat that as a bride price. He didn't treat it as a marriage. He treated it as selling them to Jacob. By not withholding that for them, he spent it as his own money. So they say, "Yeah, it's time to go." So they go. They gather their things, they load up their flocks, and they leave during shearing time. Now this is important because Laban would have been kept busy. He would have been off dealing with his flocks. He would have been kept busy. He wouldn't be able to pursue them as quickly. And something else that happens is Rachel, as they are leaving, she goes into her father's house and steals their household gods. These would have been idols that were in their house, because we get kind of mixed results on whether Laban followed Yahweh or not. If he did, it was likely a part of a pantheon of gods that he worshipped. But all that to say, there were idols in their house that Rachel then steals. She likely did this as for protection on their journey. She was likely looking to those idols for that protection. It wasn't, for Laban's own good of getting them out of the house. It was likely that she also worshiped these household gods and wanted to take them with them for protection on their journey. So they begin to travel. Jacob is traveling with all of these flocks, all of these herds, all of these children. He's going to go much slower than Laban is able to go. As Laban starts to pursue him with his armed men, they're able to travel a lot faster. And sure enough, fairly quickly, Laban and his men catch up with Jacob and the family. And that's where the confrontation happens. Laban starts laying out all of his complaints that he has. The flight. You left in the middle of the night. You took my children and my grandchildren away from me. All of these flocks belong to me. You shouldn't have left. You stolen the gods from my house. All of your prosperity was at my expense. Jacob then has his complaints, and he's, you're not a trustworthy guy, Laban. Throughout this time, you've done nothing but trick me and swindled me. You've changed my contract multiple times. You've switched my wives around. And while I've been here, I've had a pretty respectable, pretty unblemished record. I'm not deserving of the way that you've been treating me. So these are the conversations that are happening. Really, the only thing that they can agree on is that God protected Jacob and caused him to prosper. So eventually Laban looks for the gods. They're not able to find them because Rachel hides them. That's another story. But eventually they form a covenant between the two parties. Now, this isn't a covenant that's coming from a place of goodwill. Basically, it's, I don't trust you. You don't trust me. But I can't watch you and hold you accountable. But know that God, or in Laban's case, God's will. That's basically the covenant that they're being formed here. It's not out of mutual respect for each other. It's not out of peace. It's out of, I don't trust you, but know that God will hold you responsible. And that's where we're going to wrap up the story part. That's where we leave. So Jacob goes into Haran, finds his wife, deals with his father-in-law, builds up some wealth, flees, has that conflict with them. But going back, I want to review a couple things that connect to the overarching story of Abraham's family, and specifically Jacob's life. Remember, Jacob's name means supplanter. It means deceiver. While he may have had a spotless record with his time while he was with Laban, that's definitely not the case of his growing up in his childhood. We see the food swap with Esau. We see the masquerading where he steals the blessing, taking the inheritance. So when Jacob comes in and first meets Laban and says, "You are my own flesh and blood," yes, they're related, but they're also very similar. Jacob comes into the situation a deceiver, a thief, a swindler. And as we look at the story that's presented that we just reviewed, we see a lot of examples that connect back to the stories that we've looked at the past couple of weeks. First one, and these stories that we're seeing are kind of reversals of the stories that had already happened. During his 20 years in Haran, Jacob becomes the victim of the same type of situations that he had previously used to his advantage. The first one is the masquerade. Jacob pretends to be Esau and gets a blessing out of it. As he first enters into Haran, there's a masquerade where Leah is supposed to be Rachel, but that's not the case. He pretends to be somebody and gets something out of it. He gets somebody switched on him and becomes the victim of that situation. And then if we think back even further, when Esau was hungry, came in, wanted something that Jacob had, the food, the soup, he sold it to him for his blessing and his inheritance. Now, as Jacob's raising kids, one of his kids comes in, Reuben, has this food that his other wife desires, and he's traded in the process for this fruit. He becomes the victim. He becomes an object that is being traded. And then the inheritance. Jacob deceives Isaac for his benefit. Laban deceives Jacob multiple times for his benefit. We're seeing all of these reversals of things that Jacob did in his life growing up are now coming, and he is the victim of these situations. As he leaves his land, his family, leaving behind an inheritance, leaving behind a blessing, all of these expectations that he had, entering into Haran, God comes and says, "I'm making a covenant with you. I'm going to bless you. You're going to have kids. You're going to have land. You're going to be a blessing for others, and I'm going to be with you." But that's only after he leaves behind his expectations of blessing, his expectation of inheritance, the things that he swindled, the things that he stole, the things that he deceived others for. He had to step away and leave those behind. And then God comes and says, I'm going to make this covenant with you. So now as he's leaving Haran, he's coming back home with this blessing, with this family, with this prosperity. And God's going to come to him again next week, but we'll get to that. All that to say, the story, this aside in Haran that we see is really a reversal of Jacob's life up to that point. He had to come away. He had to experience the things. He had to be the victim of the same sorts of acts that he had done to others before God brought him to a place that said, okay, here is your inheritance. Here is your blessing. But it's coming from me, not from your own work. Despite the fact that you were swindled over and over by Laban, despite the fact that he changed your wages, despite the fact that he switched your wives, despite all of this, despite your own doing of trying to make things happen, here is the covenant that I am making for you. Here are the things that I am giving to you. It's not through your own work. It's not through your own deception. And despite the deception of others, I'm going to bless you, and here's what that looks like. So there's these reversals that happen. Now, that doesn't mean that Jacob is a perfect person at this point by any means. We see that he flees in the night, hiding from Laban. He deceives him in that way. There's the ongoing issue of favoritism that we see, and we'll continue to see. Jacob's going to have a preferred son, a favorite son. That's going to continue to cause problems for the family, yet God is going to continue to use the flawed family to work out his ultimate goal. So, just kind of a recap. While in Canaan, Jacob had these great expectations for his future due to the inheritance that he acquired from Esau, the blessing that he tricked out of Isaac, but he had to flee. Coming into Haran, he probably didn't have any hope for his future at all, no expectations of what things were going to look like. He probably didn't even know if he was ever going to be able to return to Canaan, and all that he had worked for up to this point in his life, he probably considered lost. And over the next 20 years, despite Laban's best efforts, Jacob begins to put together an inheritance. But this time, he realizes that it's because of God that he is prospering, not because of his own efforts or his own deception. So, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for us today? What does this story teach us and show us? Well, I think it holds two kind of contradictory lessons at the same time. The first one being, getting a taste of your own medicine. The Old Testament uses the term, be sure your sins will find you out in Numbers. And then in the New Testament, Galatians tells us, a man reaps what he sows. And we see that. That's happening to Jacob. As a result of the things that he did in his life growing up, there are consequences and results that he is now having to face as an adult, as a father, as a husband. Now, this is not a guarantee that every person in life will receive their just rewards or the punishments for their behavior. But it does indicate that God's nature assures that one's behavior will have consequences as their life unfolds. And favoritism is a perfect example of this. Throughout this story, and I know in my own life, I've had situations where favoritism can have major issues on families, whether it's a father favoriting a son, it's a husband favoring a child or his wife over his other children. Favoritism causes issues, generational issues, things that are going to cause impacts way down the line. And that's a way of our sins finding us out. When we show favoritism, when we don't love how God is calling us to love, whether that's a direct impact on us or not, it's going to cause issues. So at the one hand, you reap what you sow. But on the other hand, you've got God's plan for success. At the same time as we see Jacob's sins finding him out, him having to deal with the consequences of his life, we see that that's balanced with God interceding to bring about success despite his flaws and his failures. After Laban changed Jacob's salary, Jacob did some things to try to bring about his own success, about trying to have the stronger male and females mate together to result in better offspring and that sort of thing. Despite Jacob's own attempts at success to eventually, God replaced them with his own blessings. Now, this doesn't mean that we shouldn't never plan or strategize or, try. It does point out the need to acknowledge God when things work out, when things go well, to acknowledge him and thank him for our prosperity and, give him the credit where it's due. But it just shows that both of these have to be held together, because if you begin overemphasizing one over the other, you're going to run into some conflict. If you only take, getting what you deserve in life, if you only focus on that, it's either going to lead to a very shame-based life where you don't feel like you deserve anything as a result of your sins, or you're going to think that it's going to become very works-based where you have to work for it, or you're going to think that you deserve everything. So you're either going to end up very shame-based where you don't deserve anything, or feel like you need to work for everything, that it's a works foundation or works salvation. And we know that that's not the case either. On the other hand, if we only focus on God's plan to success, then you're not going to have any reason to try to accomplish anything. You're not going to have any reason to try. And God doesn't want us to do that either. So we've got to hold these two somewhat conflicting principles together. And how do you do that? Well, it's in abiding love. That's what brings those two things together. So our one small step today is to abide. I want us to look at 1 John 3, 23 and 24. And I didn't tell them that ahead of time, so it may or may not be up on the screen. But once I get there, I will read it. Again, if I can find it in Craig's Bible. There we go. Now this is his command, that we believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another as he commanded us. The one who keeps his commandments remains in him or abides in him, and he in him. And the way that we know that he remains or abides in us is from the Spirit he has given us. So his command is that we believe in the name of the Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another as he commanded us. That's what abiding is. It's believing in Jesus and loving one another as God has called us to. That's what brings these two somewhat conflicting principles together. When we live this way, we're going to be loving others, which hopefully means you'll be sowing and reaping love. And with your believing in Jesus, you'll be able to see and acknowledge the way that God provides for you more easily. Again, this isn't a promise that your life is ever going to be good or going to be easy. We see that throughout Scripture. We see that in Jacob's life. But hopefully, when we abide, it's going to result in our life being easier than Jacob's. So, our one small step is abide. Love God, believe in Jesus, and love others. If we can do that, that's going to set up our lives pretty well.